Over the Sinai, November 1971. I'm in the cockpit, eyes locked on the scope. One blip, too fast, too high. We push the Phantoms harder, afterburners screaming, climbing to the edge of the sky.
2, tally 1 Angel 70, he's still climbing.
Judy, confirm type.
It isn't a mirage. It isn't a phantom. It's something else. Something untouchable. Sinai, November 1971, uninterceptable. What outruns the fastest fighters and laughs at air defenses? A machine built for one purpose, to rule the sky. In the early 1960s, America rewrote the playbook of nuclear war. High-altitude bombers armed with atomic payloads could strike anywhere, anytime. The XB-70 Valkyrie promised Mach 3 speeds above 7,000 feet, fast enough to turn every Soviet interceptor into scrap metal. Soviet airspace, 22 million, maximum to warning time. Minutes. For Soviet leaders, the challenge was existential. How do you defend 22 million square kilometers of sky when a handful of supersonic bombers could cripple your nation before dawn? The answer had to be radical. Build a machine that could climb higher, run faster, and kill before the intruder crossed the border. This was the assignment given to Mikoyan Gurevich: intercept the impossible. Not a dogfighter, not a showpiece, a pure missile with a cockpit born of brute force. To catch the impossible, the Soviets had to make choices. Brutal choices. Choices that traded elegance for survival. Titanium was strong, light, and heat-resistant, but too rare and too complex to weld at scale. So 80% of the MiG-25 was steel. Heavy, simple, repairable anywhere from Moscow to the desert. 80% steel, 11% aluminum, 9% titanium, the price weight. At 40,000 pounds, the Foxbat could never dance in a dogfight, but it didn't have to. Its mission was speed, altitude, and interception, nothing more. For power, MiG engineers turned not to a fighter engine, but to a missile engine. The Tumansky R-15B-300 was designed for cruise missiles. Massive thrust, brutal acceleration. At full afterburner, more than 150 kilonewtons each. But these engines were disposable. At Mach 3, the turbines burned themselves alive. A Foxbat that touched Mach 3.2 might win a record, but lose its engines forever. Engine life, 150 to 300 hours, safe speed, Mach 2.8. Still enough to outrun anything the West could send. To see its prey, the Foxbat carried a monster, the RP-25 Foxfire radar. 600 kilowatts of raw power, the strongest radar ever mounted on a fighter. RP-25 Smerch A, 600 kilo, range 100 kilometers, large targets. It could burn through jamming pickup bombers 100 kilometers away. But the radar had no look-down capability. Targets flying low like strike fighters, hugging the earth, slipped beneath its gaze. The Foxbat was never meant to fight alone. It was an extension of Soviet ground control. Vectoring, guidance, intercept orders all fed directly from radar stations below. The pilot was less a hunter, more the trigger of a vast air defense machine. Dogfights irrelevant. The Foxbat's job was to rise fire and return, nothing more. And for its kill, the MiG-25 carried giants. 4 R-40 missiles, the largest air-to-air weapons ever hung under a fighter. Each 6 meters long, half a ton, with a warhead designed to shatter a supersonic bomber in one hit. R-40, AA-6, Acrid, range, 30-60 kilometers, IR+, SAR-H versions. 2 with infrared seekers, 2 with radar homing. Together, a deadly net for intruders too high and too fast for anyone else to reach. Max speed, Mach 2.8, safe up to Mach 3.2 risk. Ceiling, 20 kilometer record, 376 feet 6 meters, 13,000 FT 1977. Rate of climb, 208 ms. Weapons 4, XR-40 missiles, no cannon. Mission high altitude interception. The Foxbat was not a balanced fighter. It was a weapon system sharpened to a single-point speed, altitude, and annihilation of high-value targets. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. In a country that stretched 11 time zones, the Foxbat was the answer to a desperate question. How do you guard the world's largest airspace against the world's fastest bombers? The answer was steel thrust and missiles the size of telephone poles. A brute force solution to a brute force problem. July 1967. Domodedovo Air Show. The Soviets wanted the world to watch, and the world did. 3 massive jets roared overhead. Grainy film showed broad wings mistaken for agility. huge intakes believed to hide exotic titanium engines, and whispers grew had the Soviets leapfrogged a decade ahead, Domodedovo Air Show, Moscow 1967. To Western analysts, the message was clear: this was no prototype, it was a challenge. A jet faster, higher, and maybe more maneuverable than anything America had on the drawing board. Soon after record books echoed the fear. The MiG set altitude marks above 1,000 feet speed runs past Mach 2.8. Every headline poured fuel on the fire. Was this the jet that would dominate the skies, a Soviet answer to fighters America wouldn't field for another decade? For the first time, the U.S. Air Force admitted the Soviets had a fighter we could not match. The Foxbat was no longer just an airplane, it was a symbol of vulnerability. USAF Chief of Staff. For the first time, they have an aircraft better than ours, and that fear drove a revolution. Overnight performance targets skyrocketed. Out of the shadow of the Foxbat, America would forge the Eagle, an air superiority fighter, built not just to compete, but to dominate. The Foxbat scare had done its job. Even before it fired a shot, it had reshaped the future of air combat. November 1971, Israeli radar controllers lock on to a target moving impossibly fast. Two F-4E Phantoms scramble the fastest jets Israel has, America's pride exported to its ally. At Mach 2.2 and 17 kilometers, the Phantoms are straining. But above them, the intruder keeps climbing.
He's still climbing, we can't catch him.
MiG-25 Mach 2.5, 3.0, aerofotorsel, 243 km. F-4E Phantom Mech, 2.2, km. It isn't a Mirage. It isn't a MiG-21. It's something else, something untouchable. For Israel, it was more than frustration. It was shock. A jet that flew faster than missiles, higher than interceptors. A ghost above the battlefield. In Washington, the message was chilling. If Phantoms couldn't stop it, nothing in the American arsenal could. The Foxbat had become more than an aircraft. It was a symbol of fear. Each sighting over Sinai reinforced the legend the Soviets had built a plane no one could touch. The myth grew stronger than the machine itself. Reconnaissance runs over the Suez Canal untouched. Every mission delivered intelligence to Cairo and Damascus, and every mission deepened the West's anxiety. From Sinai to the Pentagon, the Foxbat was no longer just steel and engines. It was the embodiment of a nightmare, a Soviet jet that could not be stopped. September 6, 1976. Viktor Ivanovich Belenko, a 29-year-old Soviet pilot, lands the USSR's most secret jet at a sleepy civilian airport in Japan. The MiG-25, once a phantom in the sky, was suddenly sitting on the tarmac in full view of the world. Viktor Belenko, Soviet MiG-25 pilot, age 29. Belenko had planned his escape for months. During a routine training mission, he reported engine trouble, broke formation, dropped low to evade radar, and sprinted for Japan. Low on fuel, lost on navigation, he risked it all to defect. For the West, it was a jackpot. For Moscow, a humiliation. Western intelligence tore the Foxbat apart, and the myth unraveled. Its massive steel frame, not for agility, just to keep the wings from melting at speed. The broad wings, not for dogfighting, only to lift 40 tons of metal into the sky. Yes, it could reach Mach 3, but at the cost of its engines. In practice, Mach 2.8 was the limit. Its radar was powerful, but blind to targets flying low. The Foxbat was less a super fighter and more a blunt instrument. The Western press flipped overnight. The Foxbat went from untouchable demon to clumsy brute. But by then, the damage was already done. The scare had forced America's hand. Requirements were raised, billions invested. Out of that panic, the F-15 Eagle was born the fighter that would rule the skies for the next half-century. Belenko was granted asylum, later U.S. citizenship. He wrote his memoir, MiG Pilot, a bestseller that revealed not just a jet, but the cracks inside the Soviet system itself. In one landing, the Foxbat's legend collapsed, yet its shadow had already reshaped the future of air combat. After Belenko, the Foxbat did not vanish into museums. It flew and it spied where wars were real. In Sinai, MiG-25R, reconnaissance variants streaked at Mach 2.8, above 20 kilometers. Israeli Phantoms clawed upward but fell short. In the Yom Kippur War, these flights gave Egypt and Syria priceless intelligence. In the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi Foxbats clashed with Tomcats, Mirages, and Eagles. The results were mixed victories, losses, and controversy. Baghdad even claimed a Foxbat shot down an American FA-18 in 1981. Washington never confirmed. India flew MiG-25Rs from 1981 to 2006. They penetrated deep into Pakistani airspace, snapping photos at altitudes no fighter could reach. Pakistan scrambled jets, but the Foxbat was always gone before they arrived. The Foxbat family grew. MiG-25P, the original interceptor. PD and PDS upgraded with look-down radar and R-60 short-range missiles. MiG-25R, an RB reconnaissance and bomber even carrying nuclear payloads. And MiG-25BM, built for seed hunting enemy radars with KH-58 missiles. MiG-25BM, built for CD hunting enemy radars with KH-58 missiles. MiG-25P interceptor. MiG-25PD PDS upgraded interceptor. MiG-25R RB recon bomber nuclear capable. MiG-25BM SCID anti-radar. In all 1186, Foxbats were built. They set 29 world records, including an altitude mark of 23,000 feet in 1977, a record that still stands. Production, 1186. Records, 29. Altitude, 12,300 feet, FT 1977. From Sinai to the Gulf to South Asia, the Foxbat was never invincible, but it was always unforgettable. A machine born of fear, tested in war and destined to force the world to look up. The Foxbat's greatest victory was not in combat, but in psychology. It terrified the West, forcing the United States to rewrite the very problem of air superiority. The answer became the F-15 Eagle, arguably the most successful modern fighter ever built. Technically, the Foxbat was never a dogfighter. It was a missile with a man inside, designed to kill bombers at high altitude, not duel with agile fighters, a pure product of its constraints. MiG-25, a missile with a cockpit. But from that brute force came evolution. The MiG-31 Foxhound, faster, smarter, armed with the world's first phased array radar. It could track multiple targets, share data across squadrons, and intercept intruders, not as a lone hunter, but as part of a network. In the end, the Foxbat's legacy was paradoxical. It was overbuilt and misunderstood, mocked as crude, yet it left fingerprints on every fighter that came after. It showed that in war, perception can matter as much as performance. Sometimes fear is the most powerful weapon of all. The MiG-25 never ruled the skies, but it changed them forever. The MiG-25 was never the titanium superfighter the West imagined. It was steel brute force and trade-offs. A missile with a cockpit built for one mission, intercept the intruder, then go home. Not perfect, but perfect for its time. The Foxbat was myth and machine fear and fact woven into one. And war perception can change history. The MiG-25 Foxbat proved it. Myth versus reality. Foxbat, want me to dissect the MiG-31, the Foxbat's smarter, deadlier successor? Drop your next target in the comments. Subscribe, watch next, comment your topic.